For as long as many South Africans can remember, the African National Congress, or the ANC, wasn't just a political party, it was the party. You see, these were the guys who fought against apartheid, the brutal system of racial segregation that defined our country for decades. When Nelson Mandela walked out of prison and became president in 1994, it was the ANC that led us into a new democratic era. They were the liberators, the architects of the Rainbow Nation, and for 30 years they held a firm grip on power, winning election after election. They promised a better life for all, and for many, they represented hope itself. But, as with any long story, the chapters started to change. Over the years, the initial shine began to wear off. Promises of jobs and prosperity became harder to keep, and stories of corruption and mismanagement started to fill the newspapers. The dream of a better life felt further away for millions of ordinary people struggling to get by. So when the 2024 elections rolled around, something felt different in the air. The people were gatvol, as we say here, completely fed up. And when the votes were counted, the unthinkable happened. The ANC lost its majority for the first time in 30 years, dropping to just 40% of the vote. This wasn't just a small stumble, it was a political earthquake. It meant the party of Mandela could no longer govern the country on its own. Imagine being the undisputed champion for 3 decades, and then, suddenly, you can't win the fight without a teammate. This historic shift forced the ANC to face a reality it had never known since coming to power. It had to look for partners, to negotiate, to compromise. The era of single-party dominance was officially over, and South Africa was suddenly sailing into completely uncharted waters, with everyone holding their breath to see what would happen next. The election results sent a clear message from the electorate. The status quo was no longer acceptable. South Africans, especially the youth who never lived under apartheid, were voting on the issues of today, not the victories of yesterday. They wanted solutions to the crippling unemployment, the constant power cuts known as load shedding, and the rampant crime. The loyalty that had kept the ANC in power for so long had finally reached its limit. The party that once liberated the nation now found itself in a position where it needed to be saved from its own electoral defeat, a humbling moment for a once invincible giant. So, what do you do when you can't rule alone anymore? You start making some very interesting phone calls. The ANC, in a move that shocked many, decided to form a Government of National Unity, or GNU. Now, this sounds grand and noble, but what it really meant was they had to team up with their biggest rivals. The main partner? The Democratic Alliance, a party that has spent years as the ANC's fiercest critic. It was like watching your favorite football team suddenly announce they were merging with their arch-nemesis. This new government also included a few smaller parties, creating a coalition that pushed the country towards the political center. This GNU was a shotgun wedding, plain and simple. It wasn't born out of love or shared ideology, but out of pure necessity. The ANC needed the DA's numbers to stay in power, and the DA saw a chance to govern at a national level for the first time. President Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in for a second term, promising everyone that this new arrangement would work for the good of the country. He spoke of tackling inequality and fixing broken services, but behind the handshakes and smiles, everyone knew this would be a bumpy ride. The partners in this new government have fundamentally different ideas on how to run the country. The initial goodwill, that brief honeymoon period where everyone pretended to be best friends, didn't last very long. It only took a few months for the cracks to appear. A major fight broke out over the national budget, a classic who gets the money argument. The DA also went to court to challenge the ANC's controversial cadre deployment policy, which is basically the practice of putting loyal party members into important government jobs regardless of their qualifications. This is a core part of how the ANC has operated for years, so this legal challenge felt like a direct attack on its power structure. These disagreements are not just minor squabbles, they are deep ideological divides. The parties are clashing over everything from economic policy and land reform to how to professionalize the public service. While they've managed to agree on a few things like passing a bill to improve the public service, the big thorny issues remain. The stability of the entire government hangs in the balance. Every policy decision becomes a tightrope walk, and there's a constant fear that one of the partners might just walk away, causing the whole fragile structure to collapse and plunging the country into even greater uncertainty. While the politicians in Cape Town are arguing about policies and budgets, the country is facing a crisis on the ground that feels like something out of a Mad Max movie. I'm talking about illegal mining. Tens of thousands of desperate, unemployed men, known as Zamas, are risking their lives in closed-down, derelict gold mines. These mines, once the backbone of South Africa's economy, are now dangerous labyrinths. The formal mining sector has shrunk dramatically, leaving a vacuum filled by these illegal operations, which are often controlled by violent, heavily armed syndicates. This isn't just a few guys with shovels, it's a massive, violent industry. The scale of the problem is staggering. The government estimates that illegal mining costs the economy a jaw-dropping 70 billion rand every year. But the real cost is measured in lives and social decay. The Zamas are at the bottom of a brutal food chain, while crime lords get rich. In response, the government launched Operation Vala Umgodi, deploying the army to crack down on these activities. In one shocking incident at the Buffelsfontein mine, police blockaded thousands of miners underground for months, adopting a surrender or starve strategy until a court ordered them to stop. It's a sign of how desperate the situation has become. This issue is directly linked to South Africa's biggest monster, unemployment. We're talking about an unemployment rate of 42%. Let that sink in. Nearly half the people who want a job can't find one. This isn't just a statistic, it's a social apocalypse that fuels desperation, crime, and the very existence of the Zamas. When you have millions of people with no legal way to earn a living, they will find other ways. This creates a vicious cycle where a declining economy leads to unemployment, which in turn fuels illegal activities that further damage the economy. For the new coalition government, these problems are a nightmare. How can you govern effectively when you're fighting fires on so many fronts? The internal arguments between the ANC and DA paralyze decision-making, while the country's social fabric is tearing apart. The illegal mining crisis is a perfect example of this. It's a complex issue that requires a united front, economic solutions, and effective policing. Instead, you have a government fighting with itself while the army is sent to wage what looks like a low-grade war against its own impoverished citizens. It makes governing seem less like steering a ship and more like trying to plug a dozen holes in a sinking boat. All of this brings us to the big, scary question. Is the ANC's reign truly over? Some analysts warned even before the coalition that South Africa was at risk of becoming a failed state, thanks to the combination of corruption, collapsing infrastructure, and sky-high unemployment. Now, the party that oversaw this decline is forced to share power, and its ability to steer the ship is weaker than ever. The internal contradictions of the GNU are immense. The DA wants to implement free market reforms and get rid of policies like cadre deployment, which is like asking the ANC to perform surgery on its own heart. The risk of this coalition collapsing is very real. If the disagreements become too big, the DA could walk away, triggering a political crisis and potentially another election. This instability is toxic for the economy and for the morale of the nation. It makes it nearly impossible to implement the long-term plans needed to fix deep-seated problems like unemployment and the failing infrastructure. The ANC is trapped. To keep the government afloat, it has to make concessions that undermine its own identity and power base. But if it doesn't, the government falls, and the ANC could lose even more support in the chaos that follows. For ordinary South Africans, this is a time of immense anxiety and uncertainty. The hope of 1994 feels like a distant memory. People are less concerned with political ideologies and more with whether they can find a job, keep the lights on, and feel safe in their own homes. The performance of this new government will be judged on its ability to deliver tangible improvements, not on political deal-making. If the GNU spends its time fighting internally, instead of tackling the nation's crises, the public's remaining trust in the political system could evaporate completely, which is a dangerous thing. So, what happens next? This is the billion-rand question. Can the ANC, the Great Liberation Movement, reinvent itself as a modern, competent governing partner? Can it root out the corruption and arrogance that led to its decline? Or will it be consumed by its internal battles and the immense pressure of a country in crisis? Perhaps the future of South Africa no longer rests solely with the ANC. Maybe change will come from new leaders and new political formations that rise from the ashes of this uncertain era. One thing is for sure, the next few years will define South Africa for a generation to come.